International trade is the backbone of the global economy, facilitating the exchange of goods, services, and ideas across borders. It fosters economic growth, enhances productivity, and drives innovation. But international trade is about to wear a new name: tariffs and reciprocal tariffs. Well, the United States says it has for decades been a victim of unfair global trade practices. It now intends to reduce its widening trade deficit using new tariffs on goods coming into America. So, what is the future of global trade, and how will the new era of tariffs and counter-tariffs affect Nigeria's bilateral trade with the U.S.? Babajide Ogunsanya, founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data analyst, is right here to share more intelligence about the global tariff war. Great to have you on the News at 10.
Good evening, Ayatollah.
Yes, indeed. It's the season of tariffs and reciprocal tariffs, like the intro just read there. But, of course, it's something that perhaps I should say many countries should have expected or should be expecting from the U.S. President Donald Trump, you know, in his campaigns and all whatnot going into the White House. Now, from the press release released by the White House of the United States, goods coming from Nigeria into America will, of course, attract a 14% tariff. Babajide, is this rate fixed, and how was it actually computed?
So first is, this rate isn't fixed. We're likely going to see a band within this rate within the next months. So the rate isn't fixed. However, there's a minimum rate across all countries, and the minimum rate is 10%, so that's settled. Will this affect energy goods? In simple terms, we're talking about, will there be a rate applied on countries sending petroleum products into the United States? It is not likely, as of today. The information we have is that energy goods will be exempt from these tariffs. But just before we take a look, like you've asked, into how these tariffs were calculated, Ayotunde, there are three things that people should know that isn't currently being reported. Now,
Three things.
Now, these three things are things that Donald Trump is keeping close to his chest. Now, what are these three things? The first, Ayotunde, is that the United States currently only holds less than 10% of the world's shipping fleet. In simple terms, what it means is that if there's a global recession, what Donald Trump knows is that those countries that account for majority of the ships in the world, in Asia and Europe, will be most impacted, and they do not want that to happen. So the first is, majority of the world shipping fleet is not with the United States. Now, the second thing that Donald Trump is keeping close to his chest is, in the future, the United States does not intend to compete on cost. Its focus now is on innovation. And so, yes, compared to especially the European countries, most of the patents, most of the innovative ideas are registered in the United States. Third, and perhaps one of the most important things, is that focus. Yes, we've seen these tariffs applied to goods. However, these tariffs are not being applied to services. The future is that the United States intends to compete more on services than on goods. Perhaps the beginning and the first step in the journey of the emerging new currency. Now to how you started. Let's take a look at how these tariffs were computed, especially in the case of Nigeria. A lot of Greek in that formula. In simple terms, the numerator is the trade surplus. The denominator is the trade export. So if in Nigeria's case, Nigeria has a trade surplus with the United States of 1.58 trillion naira. That's the numerator. That's Nigeria's the trade deficit that the U.S. has with Nigeria, equivalent to the trade surplus Nigeria has with the U.S., 1.58 trillion naira. And Nigeria's total exports to the United States, 4.58 trillion naira. Now, these are the numbers as at last year. So in simple terms, if you work out the numbers, that comes to 35%, and then the U.S. applies like a discounted rate of 50% to bring it to about 14 to 17%. So in simple terms, this is Trump's formula, and Trump's formula is saying is taking a close eye on how the trade deficit between the United States and whatever country it has, and then looking at how much exports these countries are bringing to the United States and then applying a discount. So in simple terms, that's how we got to the 14%. But again, this 14% will keep changing based on the trade surplus or the trade deficit countries have with the United States.
All right, we're really running out of time, Babajide, but of course, I'll ask two questions and try to see how we can get this answered very quickly. Now, could these tariffs actually reduce, Nigeria's bilateral trade with the U.S.? That's one. And of course, what's the most critical, trade news or indicator that Nigeria must watch out keenly, very quickly, as a roundup?
Yes, this could negatively reduce Nigeria's trade relationship with the United States. Trump is going for a Trump first, an America first agenda. Let's take a look at beyond Nigeria. Let's look at all the other countries within Africa that the White House released, the press release. How will African countries be affected? We've seen the most impact comes to Lesotho, 50%, Botswana, 37%. We see Libya, 31%, Algeria, 30%. In summary, if you take a look at these African countries, the top 10 countries that have the highest tariffs, 6 of them are in Southern Africa, 3 in Northern Africa, 1 in Western Africa. So in simple terms, these tariffs in front of you with reference to Africa will affect the highest impacted countries are countries in the southern region of Africa. Now to your question, let's take a look at the chart of the week, because that allows us to clearly understand where the future really lies and what Nigeria and the government needs to do. Look at US, we'll take a look at Europe, and we'll finally look at China. The numbers in green shows Nigeria's trade surplus, the ones in red shows trade deficits. In the last 3 years, we've seen Nigeria having a trade surplus with the US. In simple terms, Nigeria is exporting more than it's importing to the US. In Europe, same trade surplus. However, in China, we see a significant trade deficit, especially last year, of 7.5 trillion naira. So the question on the lips of a lot of Nigerians is, will the Nigerian government start imposing tariffs on goods coming in from China? Ayotunde.
We'll definitely leave it at that, Babajide. Thank you so much for your analysis on the news at 10.
The pleasure is always mine.